police
The
organization?
police and the medical people, and being endorsed by like Scripps Integrated Medicine.
You got a badge or something, like an honorary badge? Or
Well,
something?
it's interesting. I did get an honorary badge. It was a long time
I did
ago.
my research.
You did do your research, yes. I actually had the privilege, believe it or not, to work with the actual first psychic who worked with the police department in Los Angeles. And she was responsible for working on the Hillside.
This is a big town.
Yes, she was working on the Hillside Strangler case, which was a huge case.
Right.
And so, you know, my specialty was always dead people, but every once in a while she'd have a case that she would want my, you know, kind of like insights or expertise on. And so, you know, I got brought onto it, and, you know, I didn't get the LA badge, but I got the Tustin police badge.
You got a badge.
Yeah, but I got a badge. Yeah, so.
Okay. So I would imagine that the personality also helped you work with certain people. I mean, these are people that are I wouldn't think that they're believers. They want the answers, and obviously you gave it to them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this was Betty's specialty. I, quite frankly, never really liked working with the police. Because, first of all, it's like when you're, how do I say this? A lot of times when you're working with dead people, let's just say in a crisis situation, let's just say a murder, you are not always privy to that information. In other words, it's sort of like you can't like punch up the clock here and say, oh, who done it on this day and the way it was done. Does not work that way. Okay. Because you see, I'm working as a medium. I'm not working as a psychic working on a case. I'm working with making that connection with that person that's passed over.
Okay.
So there's a few variables. One of those variables may be, quite literally, it's not meant to be known, period. Okay. Or I'm not meant to be known to pass it on for whatever reason, whether that's to protect me or whether I'm just not supposed to give out that information. I couldn't tell you. I really have no idea. The other variable maybe is that once somebody makes their transition, you see, we on this earth plane, we're still tied into visually feeling what happened to them at that moment of their passing. They're not tied into it. They're not there. They've left their body. That's like a memory. It's like, have you ever had like a, okay, have you ever had like a car accident or something like that happen to you? Okay. While that was happening for you, at that moment, you were in another dimension.
Oh, truly, I do.
Very clearly, all right?
Yeah.
You probably felt nothing, no physical pain or anything, okay? It's when the accident was over, when you do the memory thing, that you start to feel the aches and the pains and all the stuff that happens for it. So something happens in our consciousness. So when we physically leave our body, that was at a memory time. That was at a memory time at that place. We're not there now. And see, it's like they don't really want to go back there. They don't want to revisit that because to them, that was a memory. So they're into like, obviously this is where I'm supposed to be now. And I want you to know, because I love you, that I'm okay.
That I'm okay. You know, and I have to say that I heard you say something that ties into this really nicely, that, you know, when people lose somebody that's dear to them, I'm sure everybody reacts differently.
Everybody reacts differently.
But for the most part, if we truly love that person and we enjoy being with them, there's some crying or there's some, you know, and it might last a while and there's some missing them and all that. And I would think that of all people, you would be the last one to have to go through that because you could see them a minute later and you could talk to them. And yet, in your personal experiences with, I know you've lost a nephew and you lost a grandmother when you were little, that you still had your human process.
Absolutely, because grief is grief. And when we go through any loss it is in our life, I mean, it doesn't mean that I know I'm not going to see him again. It doesn't mean that I haven't had contact with him because, you know, he shows up every once in a while when he decides to be a pain in my rear.
Your nephew.
But, yeah, oh yeah. He shows up, interesting enough, a lot when I'm working with children. So it's almost like, you know, he's like, come over here, Mayanna, you know, check you out. So that's his dominance. But it does not mean that I still don't miss him.
The three-dimensional him. The hug.
Yes, of course. The physical, yes. He was very young when he passed. So it was like, you know, well, his memories ended at that age of 24. And there's not going to be, at least in this dimension.
You know, you're confirming something. I had an out-of-body type experience, and I actually came away with it with something else that the one thing that we can't do in that dimension is touch each other, hug each other.
Yes, yes.
That physical.
Right.
And that maybe part of why we come into the physical is so that we could have that.
I think it's part of the earth experience. And that's why it's so difficult for people to wrap their head around the fact that when we leave our body, that we can still have that connection of love. It's different. And it's sort of like, if you've had a dream of somebody where you have this unbelievable, what you would call, quote unquote, emotional experience, or similar to an emotional experience in that dream state. And it's unbelievable. It's like this, openless, endless kind of love feeling that is very different than the physical. Because when we're in that state, we don't really feel the physical because we're in an altered state. That's why I'm saying if you've had an experience where of an accident or something like that, you are literally altered. So when people have these issues of like, that's where they go to with somebody who's passed, I go like, don't go there because they're not there. I guarantee you, if you were in a 757 or 747, whatever they are, and you're like doing one of these, trust me, you're going to be gone way before the point it lands. Just because, but the fact that we're physically going to be dying, that's number one. But there is something that happens within our consciousness that we know that, okay, it's time, and that's sort of the deal.
Right.
That's why the soul always knows prior to passing, 4 to 6 months, that we're going to pass, irregardless of how. Besides
that experience that we just talked about of being able to connect, and yet you still have your grief and all that, how does this ability affect you personally? Like your day to day, you're walking down the street, and does somebody pop in and say, "Hey, I'm dead now," and go away, or tell somebody this? And
yes and no. There is what I call, and I don't know what other words for it, there's a boundary program.
Okay.
And that boundary means that number one, I'm not allowed to go into a vibration without permission. There's got to be a level of permission that has to happen. Okay. That's number one. But number two, I would go nuts because if every person I came in contact with, if their relatives came to me, so there's a space with that, and there's a boundary where I've learned after years of doing this work, where it's like I've learned to separate enough, or it's like you gotta like be where you are until I'm ready to open up that door. Okay. Now, when I'm in working capacity, it's harder because that door's kind of open, and when I'm done working. It takes me at least a good hour, if not an hour and a half, to come sort of back. So if I happen to be going out to dinner, like right afterwards, it's really common for me to pick up things.
The restaurant's more crowded than it would have been.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So you learn to work on that. But I think if anybody was to ask people who know me, they will tell you that Suzane's never all there, because I really do live in two different worlds. Wow. So I've had situations where people have had said, let's go have dinner on this night, and I've learned that to please either email me or put a message on my phone machine, because if I'm working, I will have no memory of it. And so they'll be sitting there waiting for me to show up, and
interesting.
And I never got that message. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a silly fun question. Halloween's coming up. Mm-hmm. Does that mean anything to the beings on the other side, or is that just us? Like Dia de la Muerte,
Yes. It doesn't mean it. Well, I do this obviously professionally, so if I was only going to work 3 days in the year,
of course.
But
are they celebrating on Halloween in costumes or something?
I don't think they're celebrating in costumes, but I will tell you, interested enough, there's 3 sequential days in a row right around that time that are very powerful. And the deal with Halloween, which is actually Holy Eve, is that traditionally it was a pagan holiday.
Okay.
And we all know about the pagans. And what their whole thing was that there was a veil between this world and the other world that they believe was very thin on that day of Halloween. Okay. So what they would do is they would go out into the woods and they would talk with nature, because that's originally what the pagans did. Everything was about the sun and the moon and nature and spirits, and that was the whole thing.
So they didn't go into the woods to trick or treat. They were
But the trick or treat is that, are you going to get a trick, or are you going to get a trick in terms of the communication of the message?
Oh, seriously?
Yes, so that's where that came.
Oh, this is cool. I'm glad I asked this question.
So that's how that came about. And so what happened is the church freaked out for a change. And they said, well, we can't have these pagans running around the woods and doing this. We have to do something about that. So they sat around, and I guess at the moment they couldn't come up with a saint. So they decided, instead of a saint, they decided to call it All Souls Day. All Souls Day is actually November the 1st.
Right.
It's the contradiction to Holy Eve or Halloween. And the Dies Morta is actually the 2nd. So that, for some reason, that time period was all predominantly focused toward people that have passed over or the spirit world. Yeah. So I think it's kind of really interesting.
That's actually a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
Thank you for answering.
You're welcome. But it is and interesting because there are a lot of traditions, from the trick or treat and where they came about, so that you wanted to keep them happy. So you would give them, the acknowledgement, or if you want to call them acknowledgement, or you can give them the treats or whatever it might be. But that's how that all stuff all came out of there.
Well, Suzane, this has been a treat.
Mine too.
Indeed, a treat. And I'm looking forward. I know we're going to do more things together, and I'm looking forward to that.
I'm sure that's true, Filippo. Yes, yes, yes.
In the meantime,
maybe we'll do some in Italy too.
Let's
do that.
I speak Italian.
I know you do.
And you speak dead.
And that's a universal language.
That's right. Yeah, you got me beat.
Yeah.
Suzane Northrop, I am Filippo, and this has been a special edition of Life Changes with Filippo. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us. Thank you all.
Yes. Ciao.
Ciao.